Well, I'm very excited today to be joined by Greg Parks. I will say my only sadness with doing the interview today is my new John Cena shirt that I bought last Sunday or when he debuted. It's supposed to come today. It wasn't here by the time we recorded. So thank you so much for coming on, Greg. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. The John Cena shirt would have been perfect. I'm a little disappointed as well.
So this is fun for me. I was talking with my wife about this last night. Listened to Greg for a long time with Wade Keller and the Torch guys talking about WWE and wrestling and stuff. But Greg obviously covers the XFL and alternate football as well. And so we've been trying to get this going for a while, and I appreciate before you go back to school making some time.
Yeah, I'm trying to fit a lot of things in here in the last couple of days before I head back to school. So I'm really excited to talk here XFL and maybe some wrestling too.
Yeah. And I will say, I think you as being a teacher, you and my wife's a teacher, I think you have a different level of patience, which I think you need in not only dealing with the live callers, that you guys take for wrestling, but also, there's a lot of questions online a lot. I know, you, Mike Mitchell, a lot of you guys get a lot of peppered with questions. What's this going on with this? What's going on with that? So you definitely have earned your mark as someone to help kind of soothe minds.
Well, not only that, but you got to have a lot of patience waiting out this XFL return again, right?
Well, and it is. So I'm so glad that we could get you today. You had your article on XFLBoard.com a couple weeks ago. I saved it so we could talk about it today. Keep in mind, XFL Board has blocked all of us on all accounts. So I don't know what we did for Mr. Mark Nelson over there. But among the other CFL talk that we're going to have on the show today, the episode is going to be named, does the XFL have a PR problem, right? Because, and obviously spurring off the article that you had. First off, what were your thoughts when all this kind of devolved a couple weeks ago, the XFL, CFL stuff?
I was surprised. I had written a column about 2 months after, I think, the XFL and CFL both went public, that they were talking about some sort of partnership. And I sort of ran down the four potential outcomes of those talks. And one of those outcomes was that nothing would get done. And I termed that to be the least likely outcome, just because I felt there was too much to lose for the XFL, which hadn't really shown that they were ready to move forward on their own, that maybe, and again, we didn't know any of the details about what these talks were about. A lot of assumptions were being made, but one of the assumptions was perhaps the XFL needed something that the CFL had, whether it was money, whether it was infrastructure, whatever, to move forward itself. And so if you looked at it from that point of view, I felt it was likely there would be some kind of deal that would be struck. I also thought that at the time the announcement was made that they were working on a partnership, I had kind of assumed that talks had begun before that. Right? Like that wasn't the initial start of the conversation. So if they were going to go public mutually to announce that they were having talks, I kind of figured, okay, maybe they're far enough along even at that point that something would get done. Because to announce talks and then to walk away would be a bitter pill to swallow, I think, for the XFL and for the XFL fans. The CFL, they were kind of playing with house money, so to speak here. If they got into a partnership of some sort with the XFL, great. If not, they were moving forward anyway with their season. The XFL wasn't. They put their 2022 season on pause for these talks. And of course, Mike Mitchell later revealed that with or without the CFL talks, the XFL was going to postpone it to 2023. So ultimately, that didn't really matter. But at the time, we didn't know that.
Yeah, it's so frustrating because, like you said, the fact that they would come out, say stuff, and just, I guess what was most disappointing was, every single ounce of anything that we've speculated or talked about the last 4 months literally meant nothing, right? That nothing, even, because we laughed, oh, they're going to do a championship game or they're going to do this or they're going to do that, these cross-branded, anything that anyone ever talked about, nothing came from any of it. And I think that that's the most disappointing part of it.
Yeah, there was just so much speculation, and that came because the non-disclosure agreements that were signed, the lack of any kind of updates from either side on the talks, and that allowed the speculation to just spiral, quite frankly, out of control into things that, putting the cart before the horse on a lot of the stuff, full mergers, and I know there are people discussing, whose rules they would keep, and I think, just from that, the CFL fans, more so than the XFL fans, I think, maybe just because there's more CFL fans at this point than XFL fans, got really territorial about, okay, if we're having a partnership, we're keeping our rules. We have tradition going back 100 years on this stuff, and we don't want to lose that in some kind of merger with the XFL. So the CFL fans had really dug their heels in, I think, about that sort of thing. And I don't know if the CFL looked at that and took that into consideration. So maybe some of the ownerships did, but even if not, I know it's very difficult to get everybody on the same page when you're not only talking XFL ownership, you're talking CFL commissioners, you're talking the ownership structures of each team in the CFL. That's a lot of people and a lot of interest pulling in different directions to come up with one solution, and ultimately they were unable to do so.
Yeah, and I mean, I think I talked when we had Rob Peterson on a couple of weeks ago. This was before it all devolved finally, and I said, if the reaction that we've gotten online and seen, and again, that's a small, it's a vocal minority, but if the reaction that we've seen is any indication of how stubborn or strong-willed, right, the governors are and the team owners and stuff, that the fans are, right, that they're so, like you said, territorial, then I said, I can imagine they walked in and thought, hey, this would be a really fun thing to explore, and we're kind of met with a brick wall, and Mike had the quote that came out, that, we showed them a bunch of different things and, we just couldn't get them on board. And I go, well, I have a feeling that it was a pretty strong, fight back from, Edmonton came out immediately after the Elks and said, we're pleased that they've moved along. Well, I mean, that was just one of the 9 teams,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think from the beginning, I was more in favor of sort of an infrastructure sharing that would ease the financial burden on the XFL in getting started. And also, sort of allow the CFL to make some kind of inroads in the United States, whatever that looked like, right? So ultimately, it sounds like that's kind of where things had ended up in the discussion. It didn't sound like they got anything further than that, but I think that would have been good. And really, the XFL, we're going to talk about my column about the XFL's PR problem. Even something to that level, which is a lot smaller, the infrastructure deal that could have happened is a lot smaller than a lot of the merger talk that happened. But it would have allowed the XFL to walk away saying, hey, these 4 months were not in vain. We got something out of it. We weren't just dragging our feet or anything like that. And I think there are a lot of fans of the XFL who look at it and do feel like it was a wasted time because so much was put on hold for those talks.
Yeah, and in relation to that, was it, I guess before we get into the column, was it surprising to you when the CFL came out and said, we're moving on with the season? Yes, the XFL provided, statements to the websites, right? But they never came out with anything. I mean, I think you even said in the column, even on the website right now, there's nothing's updated at all. I mean, was that surprising that we have not heard at all from them?
On one hand, yes. But based on their track record in the last almost a year, I mean, we're coming up on a year now when Dany Garcia, Dwayne Johnson, and Redbird Capital took possession of the XFL, and their MO thus far has been to be quiet, to not leak anything, to not announce anything substantial, whether or not they have anything substantial to announce. But the CFL got the word out there first. It almost felt like, okay, the XFL had to make some sort of statement, and they did, but it was very minimal. Like you said, it's not on the website or anything like that. So from that standpoint, it was disappointing just from a public relations point of view that nothing more was put out besides that, and kind of, oh, by the way, we're starting in 2023 now. Yeah,
it's saddening to me that something that is so fan-focused as the XFL, right, that is so, it's not a big thing right now. There's not that many people talking about it. There's not that many, there's a handful.
And maybe that's their reasoning for not being more transparent and putting things out there more, that they just, Part of it is, maybe there's not the clatter for it. Maybe that they don't see that interest right now in it. But I think also part of it is we as XFL fans like to see this as a continuation of 2020. I think the new ownership sees this as something brand new from the ground up. And so I think there might be a little bit of a difference in how we versus how the ownership views what the upcoming XFL is going to be like.
Yeah, it is. And we've equated it on the show before, where Vince McMahon, as big as the WWE is, right, is still run like a mom and pop shop, right? Vince has his hands in everything, very hands-on, where this is Megatron big, we have $4 billion. We're bringing in the executive producers of Monday Night Football, whatever, right? I mean, it's just not, Vince has always been that way, right? As big as he's ever wanted to be, it's still run like the shop down the street.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you have all these competing interests and I don't know enough about Redbird to know what their PR strategy has been for other entities that they've purchased and have run. But I think a lot of people took their cues, though, from what Dany Garcia spoke about in the numerous media interviews she did when she and the others purchased the XFL, that this is going to be super fan friendly, that this is going to be 365 days a year, 24/7 league that you won't be able to get out of your mind, sort of thing, right? And then to go almost a year since they purchased it and not hear any kind of substantial updates on what they're doing or where they are in terms of building this league, there's a disconnect there that I think fans are having trouble with.
100%. I mean, yes, my thoughts equated down to 10 seconds. That was, so what do we do? I mean, your article, says, the interesting, PR strategy or lack thereof, right? I mean, what do we realistically expect? What do you think is beneficial for them to do?
That's a good question. And it's hard because we just don't know where they are. We've gotten reporting from Mike Mitchell, who's done just a fantastic job staying on top of this. But really, he's the only one. So there is not a lot of mainstream sports media interest in the XFL. There's not a lot of people following it besides Mike in terms of really digging into the details and talking with people off the record, on the record, associated with the XFL. So it could be that they just don't have anything to talk about. And, that in and of itself seems to me to be a problem a year into this thing, and to still not really have made any gains that you can talk about. And, maybe there's a strategy. Maybe they're going to just drop everything at once. Maybe they're filming everything for a documentary that they're going to put together, and they want to keep everything under wraps. So it's a surprise when they show this, the building of XFL 3.0 or whatever like that. So there are a couple halfway decent reasons why they may not be sharing anything with us at this time, but I don't think it makes it any less frustrating for fans. I think if they came out and said, look, we've got stuff going on, but we're keeping it under wraps because we want it to be a surprise when this comes out. Okay. I think fans would accept that. I think just to know that something is being worked on and that they're not sitting on their hands, which, personally, I don't think that's going on, but there are a number of fans who believe that they're just, sitting in their offices with their feet up on their desks, twiddling their thumbs, letting time go by. And as time does go by, even some of the most hardcore of XFL fans are going to drop off in terms of interest.
Well, and that's the problem. That was exactly my next question. I've seen the Jungle Cruise, whatever, right? Dwayne's new movie, right, with Emily Blunt. And right, I think they had filmed that pre-pandemic, whatever, they're trying to get it out now, right? So I've seen nothing but tweets from The Rock the last 2 weeks. Hey, Jungle, this movie's coming out. And I think a lot of people, and even like Mark Perry and stuff with us think, when The Rock wants to turn it on, they're going to turn it on, 10 million, whatever followers, all these millions of people. But this isn't we got to get people to go see the new Disney movie. This is we got to get people that are invested in this league, right? And it's people that I think feel very burned. I was on the CFL podcast and they were asking, well, what do you think? I said, well, I think people are upset that The Rock, that they bought it, like you said, in the perceived notion is they're not doing anything. I think The Rock and the Biden endorsement and a lot of that stuff really alienated a certain fan base that didn't resonate with that wanted politics and Vince McMahon out of it. I mean, it just seems like there's a lot of things going against them from trying to retain any sort of dwindling audience there was before with this league. Right.
And I think you bring up a good point about just, the sheer reach that someone like The Rock has. So in the best case scenario, when the XFL does announce all of this stuff, all of these initiatives that hopefully they will be announcing later this year, The Rock has that reach to put that message out there. And perhaps that's why they're not worried about putting dribs and drabs of news out now, is because his reach, Dany Garcia's reach, Redbird Capital's reach is so wide that it's not going to be a problem then. And so, again, maybe that's how they're viewing things. But yeah, I think if you look at last year and the excitement that people had when this ownership group took over to now, which again, almost a year now, a couple days short of a year as we sit here and talk, I don't think there's a question that enthusiasm has waned from the most hardcore of the XFL fan base. But it's funny because, and this is what sort of softens the blow for me, is I remember in 2018 and 2019 leading up to 2020, we were having the same conversations. We were having the same talk about, if they don't get jerseys on sale by Thanksgiving, they're going to miss a big, and all of this time that went by with no news, and it frustrated a lot of fans. But by the time the XFL kicked off in that first weekend in 2020, who remembered any of that? Nobody was saying, I'm not going to watch because I was burned a year and a half ago when 3 months went by and there was no news. So I think they can win people over pretty quickly if they live up to a lot of what Dany Garcia has talked about. I mean, she has made very grand plans for this league public, and she's going to be held to that by a lot of fans. And if it doesn't live up to that, a lot of people may look at this as just another potential failure of spring football.
Yeah, I've questioned before on here, they have this grand vision. Is it too grand? Right. And we've talked because, obviously, and it's silent now, but when the USFL, about a month or so ago, whatever, said, hey, we're coming back. All these people, why can the USFL come back in, next February, which who even knows now, right? I mean, it's been 6 weeks or whatever since, but, yeah. And what I equated it to is like Dany and The Rock are like in the Matrix, and Brian Woods is like the caveman, just like we're putting the ball on field. And I
love that. Yeah.
Right. And, no disrespect to friend of the show, Brian Woods, but I don't know which of those is right. I mean, I think that ideally it exists somewhere in between. I mean, do you think, are we going too big for I mean, now Mike's talking, expansions to Canada, expansions to Mexico. I mean, are we going too big? Do we just need to get one actual 10-week season with 8 teams?
I mean, I love the idea of Mexico City. I love the idea of Toronto if they can get it to work, but right now it's all talk. And the thing that concerns me is early reporting that Mike did, where he mentioned that Redbird Capital isn't going to put any more money into this project until they get a substantial TV deal. Now, I don't know if that's still the case. I don't know if things have changed in terms of that, but we don't have a TV deal and we don't have a lot of money being put into the league. So I think most people can put 2 and 2 together there. I guess my question is, if Dany Garcia and The Rock and Redbird can't find a way to make the big stuff work that they want to do, are they willing to scale it back a little and say, okay, maybe we don't have to hit a home run on our first at bat. Let's try and hit a single for a couple years and then maybe hit a home run after that. Are they willing to do that, or is this all or nothing? And that's what we don't really know yet.
Yeah, it does feel that way. It feels like we're keeping everything close to the chest. We're keeping, it's just such a different, and I know I talked before about the Vince thing. It's just such a different dynamic. I mean, even where you have like the XFL show with like Alan and Brian, and they're like, well, we were there at the beginning, so we're the podcast and we're on the website. Like Dany, like they're not going to do that now. Like the bigger this thing gets, it just feels so much more different than this somewhat semi-approachable league that it was before, where I would like BS with the people that ran the Dragons accounts and stuff. Like, I just don't feel like that. It's feeling more NFL-y to me, where there's like a line there, and I don't know if that's a good thing.
And we'll have to see. We'll have to see once things get announced how fan-friendly it is, how much they do reach out to a lot of the older fans. Like if they have if they have some of these franchises return, Seattle, St. Louis, a lot of the ones that were very successful, are those original season ticket holders going to have an opportunity to re-up? What's their relationship with the fans going to be like? The way Dany Garcia talks, it's going to be a very strong relationship. But again, we haven't seen that borne out in the last year. So hopefully if things get up and running, they'll be able to do that. And I think, too, what a lot of people look at the Vince McMahon model and what he wanted to do, and I think people get kind of stuck in the idea that that's the only way to do it. And it's not. Dany Garcia is taking that and sort of raising the bar a little bit, and Brian Woods is working a little bit beneath that. But, when we're talking XFL, I think a lot of people are sort of stuck in that mindset of, well, this Vince McMahon's approach would have worked had it not been for the pandemic. Why don't they just copy that approach? And, Dany Garcia and Dwayne Johnson did not buy the XFL to copy what Vince McMahon was doing. That's not their MO. So, I'm willing to go along for the ride, I guess, to see where this leads, just because I know that there's a lot of ways to skin a cat, and it doesn't have to be the way Vince McMahon did it. There are a number of ways to do this. But until we see it done, it isn't done, right? So that's ultimately put the money where the mouth is and show us what the product is going to be.
Yeah, it is. It does feel like this. Well, that was how it was before. I mean, even we still and Mark on his podcast, we're with News Hub, but Mark will still talk like, well, they'll do the draft in October, and we'll do. I'm like, just because they did it one time. That's all. Well, the summer showcase, that last weekend. I'm like, it's not. This is just one way of doing it. But obviously, we're trying to use that as a way, to extrapolate kind of timelines for now. But sure. I mean, it's so far off of any timeline now, and I do think that even like having the presidents and stuff. Like, do we need to have 18 presidents? Do we need to have all these things? I mean, I think that was a good idea to have community. Like Ryan Gustafson was a great. Kind of community figure for Seattle, and some of the other, Brian Michael Cooper and some of these guys were really good. But do we need to replicate that again? Like, I don't. It feels like it's becoming much less than what we knew it was before.
Yeah, for sure. And I think as time went on, you were figuring, and no hires were being made, right? That was the key. That okay, this isn't just going to be run back 2020 with as many people as you can. Because if they wanted to do that, they could have done that in, 2022 if they wanted to. But that was not the plan. And I think there are very valuable people that worked on XFL 2020 that are still out there who may still have interest in working with them. But just like any new owner that takes over a company, they're going to want to put their people in place. And so I think there are going to still be a lot of people disappointed for the people holding on to the idea that when the XFL does get up and running for 2023, it's not going to be the 2020 club returning. You may see some people come back, but it's going to be a lot of new faces, I believe.
I have this in our show notes today. We're going to record after this. Do you have any thoughts on the announced Vince McMahon docu-series talking about, what is it, the United States versus Vince McMahon?
Yeah, I joked on Twitter that they should just sell the rights to that to Brad Falchuk and Ryan Murphy, who do the the FX series and did the People versus O.J. Simpson and stuff like that. I'd have a lot more interest in that kind of series than I would one being produced by WWE. I mean, it's just for the sheer ego trip that I'm sure it will be for Vince McMahon. It's going to be fascinating to watch and break down all the, I won't say factual inaccuracies. I'll say they took liberties with some facts because that's going to happen. It's been WWE's MO. If you ever watch any of their documentaries on the WWE Network or any of the DVDs, that they can play fast and loose with history in professional wrestling. to their benefit. So I have no reason to believe this is going to be any different.
Yeah, I just, it seems like at some point, he would, and just his folk, it was nice where he took a step back with the XFL where it wasn't as much about him, right? And it was all for luck and stuff. But it is just fascinating how it was late 70s now that we're still, that it's still the Vince McMahon show. It amazes me that hasn't gone away.
Yeah, and it never will. People have always, the last couple of years, talked about Vince stepping down, Vince retiring. I think he's still going strong at this point, having so much input into the product, both creatively and on the management side, that, I think we need to come to terms with the fact that he's not going to step away unless he's literally unable to hit the job, physically, mentally, or whatever the case may be. He's going to be there till the very end.
I got to ask you a couple quick wrestling questions before I let you go, because I know, Michael, I texted my buddy Michael, he goes, well, you got to make sure you talk about wrestling when you have Greg on. We're back, we're with fans, right? We're out of the Thunderdome. I'm very casual at the moment, just because it really did kill, this pandemic era really did kill it for me. Now that we're back with fans, should WWE just have taken the last year and a half off?
It's easy to say, yeah, but there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff, contractual obligations that they had would have made it very difficult. I think they did the best they could, quite frankly. And they could, the Thunderdome, I know it's not the same as having fans in the arena. Nothing can replicate that, but it's a lot better than just empty arena wrestling, which is what Impact Wrestling did, what Ring of Honor did as they continued during the pandemic. At least WWE thought outside the box a little bit and brought the faces in via the Thunderdome and the video wall and things like that. So I'll give them credit for that. I think it would have been hard for them to completely shut down during that time.
Much has been made about Vince, shutting down the XFL, right? How he did, where it was shuttered, it was bankrupt. We've long prognosticated on the show that, basically a lot of the pressure is coming from the TV networks, with USA and Fox and all of that, that basically, that's why he just kind of got rid of the XFL rights so he could focus on, hey, if I can't run events, and then all, it happened in Florida, right, where they let him run all the events. I mean, what is your take on that, I guess, to get back a little bit to the XFL, why he shut down when he did and let it go as he did?
Yeah, that's still a frustration for me. And again, it's not my money. He had set a certain amount of money aside for the XFL, and as a good businessman, he wasn't going to spend anything over that 3-year period. And when the pandemic hit, and it looked like he could potentially be losing some revenue here that wouldn't be made up with the money he had set aside, he just said, "Look, I'm backing away from it." And maybe that's Vince being a good businessman, but I look at what a lot of other companies have done where they furloughed employees over the summer to kind of recalibrate and figure out where this pandemic was going and figure out how to run amidst it. I think he could have done that. Again, I don't know all the particulars and all the financial details behind it, but I'm surprised he didn't at least try to do that first. I think simply blaming the pandemic for the demise of the XFL is too simple. He was on the call that Donald Trump had as president with the leaders of the sports leagues. And I don't know if everything from that call has come out, but just based on the president's public posture at the time, he would have implored these companies to still keep going and to, not stop. Right. So it's interesting that as close to Trump as Vince is, that he sort of went against what we assumed that advice would have been. And also you have to look at this. This came during a time where WWE and Vince let go two very high ranking executive vice presidents, longtime executive vice presidents in Michelle Wilson and George Barrios. And that greatly affected the WWE stock price, which of course greatly affected Vince McMahon's personal wealth. So I think Dave Meltzer put it that, it's easy to lose. It's easier to lose $300 million on the XFL investment when you're worth $5 billion than it is to lose $300 million when you're worth $3 billion. And that could have been part of the math that Vince took into account when he shut down the XFL, that all of a sudden the WWE, and by virtue him, were not worth as much. And all of a sudden the money that he was spending on the XFL became more important to him. So again, kind of circling back to my original point, I think it's just too simple to blame COVID-19 and the pandemic for shutting down the XFL. I think there was more in play.
Last question for me. I thank you so, gracious with your time. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure, you get these, I can only imagine all that. I was thinking back, do you remember, Boris from, was it Boris from Chicago that would call in all the time? Does he still call in?
Yeah. He's called in, the last couple WWE pay-per-views, actually. And it's funny because he'll say, I didn't watch the pay-per-view, but, and then he'll go off on this tangent and I'm like, vintage Boris, so doesn't like John Cena, doesn't like Roman Reigns. That's the crux of his argument usually when he calls into Wrestling Night in America that I host on the Torch family of podcasts. So there was a very long period where we didn't hear from Boris, or at least I didn't. I don't know if he called into the other podcasts, but he's been back the last few pay-per-views.
Yeah, because it was always, seeing the turning heel. I'm always going to go VIP next month. And then I didn't actually watch the show. I go, man, he's always one paycheck away from getting that. My question for you, and this is, we were in San Jose for the Seth Rollins cash-in, where Roman was going to be crowned.
Oh, beautiful.
We were in, I'm very anti-Roman. We were in Dallas when they had the 18-hour show, right? And Roman finally went over. And then we were there for the Brock Lesnar, the New Orleans stuff. Now that we are, Roman's heel now, it's 8 years in. I know you get asked this all the time, but was that collateral worth to get to like what we have Roman now and all the bodies that have been strewn along the way?
Well, that's the frustrating thing, right? Is that people who had been calling for Roman Reigns to turn heel all those years were right. And this is the end result, which is Roman Reigns doing not only the best work of his career, but perhaps the best work of anyone in WWE right now, from a character standpoint, from an in-ring standpoint. So we could have had this 5 years ago. And I think that's the frustration is, you look at some, like you said, the collateral damage of the people who were not pushed as top baby faces because Roman Reigns was the focus. And if Reigns was a heel, what great baby faces could WWE have made in that time when they spent all that effort on Roman Reigns and the suffer and succotash stuff and the stuff where they clearly had no idea what they were doing with him. Like they were throwing anything against the wall to get people to cheer him. And so, and I get it. Fans were wrong about John Cena. Fans wanted John Cena to turn heel all those years ago. And sticking as a babyface was probably the right move in the long run for him. We can say that now. But we can also say that fans were right about Roman Reigns, that the best thing to do would have been turn him heel, if for no other reason than fans would have eventually been clamoring for him as a babyface. And I think that's what's going to end up happening here is down the line, maybe not next year, maybe in 2023, fans are really going to want to cheer Roman Reigns as a babyface. And so WWE will have gotten what they wanted all along in the end. Yeah,
as someone who hated Cena for so many years, and when he went over, was it him and Triple H in Detroit or whatever, and he got booed at the Hall of Fame, and as someone, I hated Cena as much as you could ever hate Cena, and to cheer him now, I was just gonna say I could never see myself cheering Roman Reigns, but you never know.
Yeah, strange things can happen.
Okay, final question. I lied. How excited are you for Punk and Bryan Danielson in AEW, presumably the night before SummerSlam, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly when. It sounds like Punk will be free starting in August. They just announced last night that the second episode of AEW Rampage, which is their second show, their 1 hour show on Friday nights, which will debut next month, is going to be from the United Center in Chicago. So a lot of people are putting two and two together. They dropped some hints last night on Dynamite that CM Punk is all but signed, sealed, and delivered. And AEW has a lot of momentum right now. We'll see what the rating is for last night's show, but they had a very strong rating the week before. They're challenging Raw and SmackDown in some of the key demographics ratings-wise. And so, CM Punk and Bryan Danielson, I think, I'm not going to say that's going to put them over the top, and that's what's going to lead to them beating WWE in the ratings or anything like that. But those are difference makers. I think it's absolutely a fact that they can be difference makers. So it's about to get real interesting if they are indeed headed to AEW, which all signs point to that being a fact. But it's going to get real interesting here real soon in the WWE versus AEW. I don't know if I will call it a war yet, but let's just say it's a battle.
It's going. Yeah, I think it was last week. It was the 10-year whatever for Money in the Bank with Punk and all of that. And I'll, Paul, my co-host, and I would lament forever what a wasted opportunity all that was, and the Rey Mysterios of it, and Punk coming back and everything else. I mean, I think that there was such money there, and I don't know. Punk's really old, so I mean, it's been a long time.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting when he does come in. What's his role? Is he babyface or heel? I think if he comes in that episode of Rampage in Chicago, no doubt he's going to be babyface, but he could turn heel soon after that. How long is he in for? Like, what's his contract? Is he in for every week? Is he in for just the big shows? What does that look like? His body has taken a toll from the years of professional wrestling, from his time not only in MMA, but you got to remember training. And MMA is no joke. So it's not just the bouts, it's the training. But he has had some time off and has been able to heal up whatever whatever injuries he may have had. And, if his heart is in it, and, that remains to be seen too, because he's kind of backed away from wrestling aside from hosting WWE backstage. And even then, sometimes it didn't seem like he was all that into the product. If his heart is in it, I think he can be a difference. But if he's coming in, just because Tony Khan threw a lot of money at him, fans might be disappointed.
Yeah, I totally forgot that he did the MMA thing. That is how long I was like, oh yeah, that happened. Greg, we'll get you back on at some point. Hopefully not another year from now. Thank you so much again, and all the extra time and everything. Really appreciate your time, and I wish you well getting back to school. I know Dorothy is also on that venture here soon as well. So.
Thanks, Reed. It's a pleasure finally sitting down and talking to you guys.
Perfect.